Well, for me, the truest thing that I think I can possibly say is that there is nothing I know more in this universe than myself. Of all things that I could know, they're always going to be partial in comparison to myself. But even within that, the trick is that as time moves forward, I still act spontaneously. And I don't mean that, as kind of like a fun quirk. I mean that more as in I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, what I'm going to say, or what events or reality is going to demand of me. But of the things that I do know, I can make forecasts and I can be presented with hypotheticals and theoreticals and give kind of a rough outline, maybe deduce what I want. And within that, there are very strong sensations that are easily deciphered and easily put into words. There are people that I've met that I can easily call friends. There's a person that I've met that I can easily call love. And those things are far more certain. But even within those things, I don't know exactly what I'm going to say tomorrow or the next day or the next day. But knowing those things with such a high degree of certainty and having so much sensation attached to them, I don't really need to know. And that's really the good part, is like, we don't absolutely need to know. It's like that old metaphor where you're walking up a staircase and you don't necessarily need to know 75 steps ahead. You just have to take your foot up to the next step and continue walking up them. You don't need to know, but you can trust that the step is there based off of the current step and based off of looking upwards. You can kind of roughly see that there's stairs there. But that's really the gist of life in general. It's that meeting point where the known and the unknown cause friction. That's where the heat is and the warmth. And something like a camera, it's interesting when you think about like a movie or a TV show, the fact that the camera is like the center of the universe, essentially. The camera is like this nebulous center of awareness that just so happens to be near the characters to capture what they're doing. And as the audience, we're not supposed to think about the camera at all. It's not supposed to be a consideration, and if you're thinking about the camera, then you're not as immersed as you could be. And if you think about a situation like, say, you're at the beginning of a movie, and there's like 5 characters, how do you know which one is the main character if the camera pans around and spends about 2 seconds on each face? In the very beginning, it's unknown who is the main character of the story until the camera spends 3 seconds or 4 or 5 on one of them. Then it clicks for the first time that this might be the main character. Or maybe we've seen a long selection of main characters, and maybe we know something about the movie ahead of time, and maybe we even know who the star is in the movie. So we have that little bit of information to go in with. But we still need to see that additional time spent with that person to verify that they're the main character. And we spend the entirety of our lives with ourselves. And strangely, as people, so far as I'm concerned, and so far as you're concerned, I'm the center of the universe, but so are you. I think, feel and act as if I am the center of the universe, but I know that all of those things are present in other people as well. So I can't and don't lay full claim like that, It's still extended out into other people just as reasonably as it's evident within myself. And I've noticed when I'm reading, it's the strangest thing. When I'm reading a book, there is this state of immersion or attention that is so complete that each word I read produces a clear movie-like image in my mind, and it's like I'm there, and you're fully and completely immersed, and it's like multiple levels are clicked into place, and everything is great. But if there's a voice in another room that I can just barely hear, but I can hear it enough to make out words, I can feel a fraction of my attention become displaced. And I don't want that to be happening, but whether I want that or not, my mind and my existence automatically starts to interact with that voice, and it wants to decipher what that other person is saying in the other room, but it also consciously wants to be reading this book and return to full immersion. And there's this like 90-10 ratio that comes into play at that point. And then it grows to like, 70-30, which increases frustration. Maybe the voice gets a little louder, it becomes a little closer, or a second one joins, and now it's conversation. And you can feel your attention at its absolute maximum, at its absolute limits when it starts to split like that. You can really feel what it's like to have it divorce, what you want being one thing and what it does being another. It's like you learn something about yourself when your attention divides like that. And there's nothing that I can do. There's no way to go back and just continue reading until the voices are gone, honestly. Because I've been in that situation many, many times. And it's frustrating, to be honest. And even talking like this, I can't do it if there's a voice in the background or a persistent distraction. Because talking like this requires full immersion on my part. If there's a voice in the background and I have a 10% attention split like that, my immersion breaks, and it makes it impossible to talk with any kind of interest or conviction. Because even when I'm speaking like this, I'm not just saying words. I see shapes and images and pictures that I am drawing from to say what I'm saying. When I'm talking about relationship dynamics or anything in the realm of human social activity, I'm seeing shapes and feelings associated to those shapes. And it's almost impossible to talk about it in any interesting way otherwise. There has to be some sort of attachment to those things. And when I tell somebody I love them or talk about how I feel about them, I have to summon that emotion. Otherwise, it's just not, it's not even worth saying if you don't feel it, And that's how I imagine something like acting. Like really good actors, they live on the edge when they're on set, They have to actually summon those emotions, which is crazy if you think about it. And when a person is even existing normally in their life, I think there are fractions or pieces or threads of the truth. And getting just a piece of it makes a person want more of it until a person can feel so complete about it or have such a complete picture of it that they can safely attach a feeling to it. It's like people will say, like, I don't know how to feel about that, you know. A person kind of remains in this limbo until at least enough of it is known to where the rest of the picture can be assumed. And it takes a lot of years of living before a person can safely complete the rest of that circuit to assume that they know or can attach a sensation to something that's considered true. Like, we live in a strange time, man. Like, I see it happen over and over again where an event unfolds or an event happens and it's broadcast, but it's only the most highly concentrated point of an event. Like, the peripheral events aren't yet known, but people act and behave as if the truth is fully known. And I'm still waiting for the rest of the context to become known before I can associate a feeling to it. And it kind of amazes me how people can dive in so head first and associate feelings to events when the truth isn't fully available. And then, as the events become known, the true thing becomes something different. And you have to backtrack and you have to disassociate. It's like, it would be hard to trust yourself if you made that leap often and were wrong often. You know, how could you trust yourself? It's like that situation in dating where you keep falling for people and you don't notice the truth over and over, and feelings are associated to people, and over time you just stop trusting yourself. And that happens a lot. I mean, that's what the early parts of dating are. But I think most people, including myself, has this thing where you just get away from it. Because it's only then when you can better, more clearly, and more accurately decipher what's happening and know yourself finally. I mean, it seems inevitable that people take some period of time away from what is considered normal or usual from themselves, you know, this kind of reclusive phase. At least that's how it was for me. And it's like this fast forward period where everything that you've experienced becomes synthesized in a way that you just can't do while you're still involved and attached. And that happened for me in my 20s. So when I re-entered the world, it was just so different. It's like the difference is night and day. You can see things as they happen instead of having to suffer consequences and find out later. It's a much better and easier way to live, to know what's happening as it's happening, to have this part of you that's fully immersed on one hand, but you don't have to disassociate and analyze in real time to comprehend what's happening. It's like you have matured sensations attached to the present as it's unfolding that almost signals you and feeds you the truth in a much more rich way without deep analysis being necessary. I mean, maybe sometimes there's a little bit that's needed, you know, but nowhere near like when you're younger. When you're younger, you're just not tuned. It takes tuning, actual tuning, years of tuning, to emerge on the other end of anything. I think I've concluded that that's what maturity is. It is that. You're young and you're like a bullet, you know? You just go. But at some point you slowly start to slow down and you detach a bit. And you spend some time relatively alone, what you would consider alone, at least in comparison to what you've been doing so far. And then you re-enter. But when you re-enter, you have this long period of attachment and you have this period of detachment that acts as a synthesis. So when you re-enter, you have both of those things within you, stored in you, and you just experience things completely differently. And you kind of notice, you can't help but notice that you're the center of it all. I mean, what is a star? Think about this, like, as people, where does that term even come from? It's a very fitting term, and I think in terms of human development, it's not even something that has been completely possible over the centuries, you know? It's almost like certain things had to happen in order to even figure out what that level of human being is, you know? How can you find out among a large population who is and isn't, you know, a star, quote unquote, or who does or doesn't have this highly compelling magnetism and gravity that people just can't seem to get enough of, because people stay localized, who in that situation it is such a person. It's almost like that remains dormant until certain things happen, until broadcasting is possible. I mean, the role of a talent agent is not possible until certain things have happened. A talent agent is a non-existent role. That skill is locked away for centuries until certain things unfold. But in order for those things to unfold, very specific things have to happen too. You need to have an Isaac Newton. And for an Isaac Newton, you need to have a Galileo. And you need to have an Aristotle before them. They all heavily relied on each other. And Isaac Newton was the person that really hit it home for the West that Earth and its processes and its basic constitution can be manipulated, rearranged, reorganized, shaped, mastered, and honed. That this thing was a skill to be sharpened. He was the one who took the telescope, which, before Newton, the telescope was incapable of separating light, and its quality was greatly diminished because light was assumed to be a pure thing that was distorted or made impure. It wasn't viewed as something that was made up of all colors. It was viewed as something that color made impure or distorted. But something like a prism, and Newton comes along and separates light, and you add another prism to collect the blue and it stays blue, and he realized that light was made up of all color, which is not something that one would intuitively think. I mean, think about pre-Newton. You're going through your day-to-day life. You would figure that light is a pure, unadulterated, heavenly substance. Not something that's just mechanical. or something predictable or something even able to be comprehended. But Newton comes along and starts to use mirrors and telescopes to separate light, and it greatly magnifies the ability, no pun intended. And that was the prelude to the Industrial Revolution, at least I think. And the Industrial Revolution was a prelude to something like the carbon of millions of years locked away in Earth being accessed. Wouldn't it be strange if Earth grew people to unlock all that trapped and stored carbon? What if Earth needed it? What if there was a serious carbon deficiency that was reaching a critical point, and humans came around at just the right time to access all that carbon that was locked away? What if that was a story that we didn't even know we were part of? Because it just so happens that that is the case. We were reaching this point where carbon levels on Earth were critically low. And there's no other way. I mean, we're talking like billions and billions of barrels of this substance stored in chambers within Earth that would have never come out any other way. The series of events that were required to get carbon out of the Earth were something only human beings are capable of. And there also had to be something useful for carbon, for hydrocarbons. There had to be engines that thirsted for it. And it just so happens the modern world ran off it. And all of these things happen so fast. It's like that's a necessary step, I think. And then, strangely, you have a moon, I think it's of Saturn, called Titan, that just rains natural gas. Always falling from the sky, massive oceans of it. There's more natural gas on Titan, hundreds of times more than there is here on Earth. And it's a moon essentially made of this stuff. It's like, we don't know exactly where this story is headed, but there is certainly a kind of human yearning that has subsumed multiple generations. Like, what have people been doing this whole time in the same way that we live life and we're able to kind of look back and analyze it from a somewhat detached point of view and then become re-immersed all the wiser. Look back at human history, not from the point of view of somebody who has a particular aim that they wish to get out of it. Like, what have people been doing this whole time? Not just a little segment out of context, but that segment within the segment before that. It helps to know the story of Newton with Galileo and with Aristotle. Because Aristotle made assumptions about reality that Newton disproved seemingly as naturally as he breathed. I mean, this dude was made to do what he did. He reminds me of Nikola Tesla. Completely devoted to natural philosophy and science. Newton found out things like that became simple statements that just opened the brain up, like particles attract other particles based off their mass and characteristics. That sentence alone is kind of common knowledge now, but back then it's like, okay, people were thinking that processes were guided by angels, which is a way of saying things, it's like I don't put disrespect on people for thinking that way, but It was just wildly different pre and post Newton, but Newton relied heavily on his earlier thinkers. But when Newton was discovering what he was discovering about light, he didn't do it to improve telescopes. But telescopes were certainly improved by his discovery. It was only later when he realized there was practical application for the stuff he was learning. But once that happened, it changed everything. And Cambridge became a center for the Industrial Revolution. England became a center for the Industrial Revolution. And what a difference that made. But it seems like over human history, parents have wanted a situation where their children are better off than they are. I mean, I think that's safe to assume. Of course, there are exceptions. There always will be. But even today, your parents are likely to say, I always wanted to give you a better life than I had. Which is a simple statement that encompasses a lifetime of activity. And sometimes a parent is going to fall from that idea and not live up to it. But in the end, that is going to animate a large chunk of their activity. And that feeling has been driving and driving and driving and driving, among others, this story. And revelations that dramatically push us forward are these intense eureka moments. And it really makes you wonder. It makes you wonder what else there is. I happen to be a believer that we are intended for this solar system. I really don't think that we're going to be leaving the solar system, but that's not a bad thing. I think it's amazing, because the solar system is very different from the observable universe. Usually when you have a solar system, the planets are all similar in size and makeup. Usually rocky planets are surrounded by more rocky planets of similar size. But ours has Saturn. It has Jupiter. It has these utterly insanely massive gas giants out of nowhere that act as shields for anything incoming. They have such massive pulls of gravity that one can only wonder how much they've absorbed over the years. That has kept Earth and the inner solar system safe. And especially the fact that they're gas giants the way they are, it's like, how much can they absorb and vaporize as it gets, further and further down? I would really wonder, because they're two planets that absorb things and crush them and turn them into gas. Essentially, those gas giants are giant collectors that turn whatever enters them into their most basic elements, into gas. And it's crazy that they exist. And the fact that Earth is an entity, a body, that survives off, in part, plate tectonics. I think of the observable universe, it's like 0.003% of planets have that, which is so rare that it may as well be pretty close to singular. And if you think about that, it constantly keeps Earth's surface renewed. Who knows what impacts or things have happened to Earth that we can't see because it's been cycled through. And plate tectonics makes it to where land masses can collide and turn into these bodies that reach up into the sky. Turn into these giant mountains that scrape the sky and pull moisture from it and are cold enough to freeze the water there, but eventually the frozen water climbs down the mountain more and more and more until it gets warmer, and it turns into liquid water, and it flows down and starts to carve these rivers, some of which are thousands and thousands and thousands of rivers from the Himalayas, for example, or even in the U.S., the Mississippi River, anywhere really, in South America as well, the Amazon, and you have the Nile River flowing north from Ethiopia, which is one of the highest places on Earth. There are these sites where these mountains reach up into the sky and become the basis of the most beautiful places on Earth. And not to mention functional. I mean, think about Egypt. Think about the Egyptians who have been there for so long, none of which would have been possible without plate tectonics, without this system here, without that river. And the Mississippi River is what makes the United States a superpower. It gives, I think, like 31 states ocean access. It turns us into an importer, exporter from just about anywhere. And then, obviously, the Atlantic and Pacific on either side, with even more ocean access. And the Chinese have the Yangtze. You're going to need that. It's extremely helpful. If you look at any map and you look at the rivers and how they flow, and then their tributaries, how they flow like veins, and it's just this system of life, fresh water that literally comes from the sky. And it's just amazing. Like when people talk about God's plan, that's what I see. I don't see a specific plan for every single human that's forecast and that's known, because that seems to violate what God says that we're even here for, what the Bible even says. To me, God's plan is this system of balances, this scheme that supports life in the exact way that it does. Like for me, it's God's plan for something like plate tectonics to exist, to allow these rivers to flow, which just bleeds life onto these continents. To me, that makes a lot more sense, because I can't help but also imagine it like God, hypothetically, or somebody like God, having that screen in front of him with Earth and all the continents together at first, and then you take your fingers and spread them open and watch the direction of each continent. For you, it happens in just a few seconds, but for Earth and reality, it takes millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. Who knows what it's actually like? You know, you draw out the activity of objects, but not the actual activity of human beings. The human beings being a system of balances that comes from a system of balances that are perfect by all consideration. And as far as each person is concerned, they are the center of the universe. But a wise person doesn't just see that. They understand that knowing this about themselves, other people are also the center of the universe, so far as they're concerned. And those two things, those two seemingly opposing things, are the beginning of all human motion, and everything can come from that. Yes, I am the center, but so are you. And thus we go. And it all just seems so perfect, you know. The moon, just as well. the likelihood of such a massive moon, it's like almost a third of the size of Earth, highly unlikely. Very rare for that to happen for such a massive moon like that. And you put it all together, and more. There's so much more, including the sun and the properties of the sun. It's just such a highly unlikely scenario. And you could say that such a highly unlikely scenario is what breeds highly unlikely things. And you could say that because human beings grew from Earth, we are as natural as Earth itself. Or you could say Earth was made for us and we were made for it. Either explanation. You could say that, given that, there is nothing that a human being could dream or think or do that is truly unnatural to Earth. There's nothing we could do that is truly surprising to Earth. Because we grew from it, right? Or we were made for it. Yeah, I mean, either one of those two, you can still conclude that anything that we could do is natural. It is of Earth. It is effectively the Earth's imagination. That's what we are. Both theoretically and you could say in practice. And anybody who, I think, spends time looking at our history, knowing the present and knowing oneself, can see that there are levels. Absolutely. And as time has gone on, it's been like a key that spins further and further and further down and into these notches that just unlocks more and more potential, different parts of the brain, and higher we go. And we've come this far, and it is true to say that if we lost some of what we found, and for whatever reason we were unable to recover it, it would be lost and we'd have to do it again. Because these things aren't self-evident, you know? Some of them are, but some of the deeper things that really unlock more of us are not self-evident, and they take a clever person on top of the work of clever people to get there and to open it up for the rest of us. When I was talking about earlier, when it comes to a star, a person who just seems to have this it factor, in the US at least, in the West, we have grown a system, a place that breeds such people. And I think there's more and more of them, you know? I mean, people like planets have this kind of gravity. And you can get 100 people to recite the same lines, to say the same thing. And it's happened countless times, where a director or somebody doing casting is watching people audition, and suddenly this person is just going to come along and just nail it, even if they don't think that they are, you know. They're just going to nail it, and something clicks, and they're the right person for this role. And that feeling that is evoked in that person doing casting or director or producer or whatever is going to exist in the viewer as well. It's not so rational. The rational part is picking somebody who evokes that feeling. You know, that's the rational step. The rational thing isn't so dead sounding. It's actually alive. It is that life that people inspire that draws them in. That's what makes them stars, like literally celestial bodies. They draw things in and keep them there. They are the centers of solar systems. But so are black holes. black holes and stars have magnetic energy. Very, very strong magnetic energy. And stars eventually become black holes. And in order for a star to go through its full life cycle, the universe has to be a certain age. So, where black holes exist, where even stars exist in half through a lifetime, it implies certain things about reality, about the universe. And the fact that Earth has been here for so long and still exists as it does is nothing short of amazing. And there's many things that I haven't even mentioned here that make this possible, but Earth in and of itself is the center of attention and the focal point for the human story, the collective story. And that consists of civilizational level motion, multi-civilizations in conflict, in trade, the totality of that activity in motion. And here we go, I might be part of the United States, but I know what I want for the United States. I've said it many times, I want the United States to rule the world, to dominate the world. Because who else? Who else would you want to have such a position in a planet where anybody with that potential is going to reach for it? And who else would you trust with such a thing?